Hello everybody, welcome to MH3, which stands for Murders She Investigated. I'm Zone. If you are new to MH3, you are invited to subscribe this channel. In this video, we shall find out the identity of passenger X. Previously, we have built a profile for passenger X. Let's begin with a review of the profile. The 5 attributes applicable to passenger X are 1. A Chinese national. 2. A Malaysia Airlines employee. 3. A person who made no prior booking. 4. A person boarding MH370 due to last-minute changes. 5. A person who checked in but did not board. Of the 5 attributes, the last one is the most peculiar. How could a person who checked in, did not board, but ended up on board? To answer the question, we need to understand how commercial flights operate before taking off from the runway. Airlines usually releases a flight 90 minutes or so prior to the scheduled departure time. Subsequent to the release, passengers are allowed to board the aircraft through a boarding gate. When boarding is finished, the cabin crew close all cabin doors. A pilot uses the radio to report to the airport ATC the ready status and request a pushback. A pushback car comes and pushes the aircraft off the gate to a taxiway. The pilot starts the engines and the aircraft moves along the taxiway until it reaches the assigned holding line. The aircraft stops and waits behind the holding line for further instructions from the airport ATC. The other side of the holding line is the airport runway, where takeoffs and landings take place. When the airport ATC instructs the pilot to move to the runway, the pilot does so and positions the aircraft in the center of the runway for takeoff. As soon as the airport ATC gives permission to take off, the aircraft should take off immediately. The airport ATC usually expects an aircraft to take off soon after it is positioned on the runway. An aircraft pausing on the runway for 90 seconds or longer is extremely unusual and warrants immediate attention. Bearing the above operational procedures in mind, let's recall how we know passenger X checked in but did not board. As described in the passenger X video, the information came from the head of the Malaysia Civil Aviation Authority, Azharuddin Rahman. He made the claim at a press conference. The wording he used was, quote, "did not board," unquote. Passengers usually board an aircraft from a boarding gate. When we heard Azharuddin said "did not board," we automatically assumed the passenger did not board the aircraft. Actually, what Azharuddin meant was did not board from gate C1. If passengers did not board the flight from gate C1, there were only two other boarding possibilities. One was at the end of the taxiway, where MH370 stopped and waited behind the holding line. The other possibility was when MH370 paused on the runway, waiting for taking off instruction from the airport ATC. There is no evidence suggesting anything unusual when MH370 stopped and waited behind the holding line. However, in the video titled "Unusual 3-Minute Pause on the Runway," we verified that MH370 paused on the runway for about 3 minutes. We also analyzed Zahari's unusual WeChat call on the runway. These very atypical activities suggest passenger X most likely boarded MH370 while it was on the runway. When the aircraft paused on the runway, the cabin doors were too high to be accessed from the ground. The only entry for passenger X to board would be through the EE Bay entry, which was at the bottom of the fuselage. Zahari was an experienced pilot who had an excellent track record. He would not have allowed a person to board the aircraft from the EE Bay on the runway unless he was instructed to do so by his employer. Zahari probably believed in good faith that the instructions were legitimate. To gain Zahari's trust, passenger X was dressed up like a Malaysia Airlines employee. This was why Malaysia Airlines later claimed passenger X was also an employee. Malaysia Airlines claim and the public reaction to the claim are in the passenger X video, if you wish to refresh your memory. To make it legitimate, Zahari's superior probably said passenger X was an engineer from the engineering department. The engineer was assigned a job to be performed on flight MH370. Given the job assignment, passenger X was to be seated in the cockpit. Later on, you will find out that passenger X was indeed an engineer, a telecommunication engineer. So, who was this passenger X? Given passenger X was a Chinese national, we can eliminate the 12 flight crew members, since none of them were Chinese. Of the 227 passengers on board MH370, there were 153 Chinese nationals. Passenger X must be among them. A prudent way to look for passenger X is to examine the background of each and every of the 153 Chinese passengers. This was a practical step, but an essential clue was provided by Malaysia Airlines when it volunteered a name. On March 8th of 2015, the anniversary of MH370 incident, Malaysia Airlines held a commemoration at its academy in Petaling, Jaya. Its chairman gave an opening speech. In the speech, he reiterated there were 239 people on board MH370. He also said of the 229 people on board, there were 13 Malaysia Airlines employees. To pay tribute to the 13 employees, the chairman called out their names one by one. A person named Liang Xu Yang stood out because he was not one of the 12 flight crew members. Liang Xu Yang, on board MH370, but not listed as a flight crew member, must be on the MH370 passengers list. By going through the passengers list, it was discovered that there was no Liang Xu Yang. However, there were a 60-year-old Liang Xu Yang and a 30-year-old Liang Xu Yang. They both were Chinese. Liang Xu Yang was a Malaysia Airlines employee, and Liang Xu Yang worked for Huawei, a Chinese telecom company. At first sight, Liang Xu Yang seems more likely the passenger X we are looking for, because he worked for Malaysia Airlines. However, judging by the pronunciation, Liang Xu Yang sounds closer to Liang Xu Yang. Let's take a closer look at Liang Xu Yang first. Liang Xu Yang was born in China, lived in Beijing, and was a salesman for Malaysia Airlines Beijing station. In early 2014, he and his wife, Zhang Lingdi, heard there would be a grand Buddhist event in Kuala Lumpur. The event was scheduled for March 2nd. Approximately 30,000 Buddhists coming from all over the world would attend the event. Some of the couple's friends planned to participate and then take the opportunity to tour around Malaysia afterwards. Liang Xu Yang and his wife joined their friends and went to Malaysia as a group. The trip went well. On March 8th, the group finished their sightseeing and boarded MH370 at Kuala Lumpur International Airport to return home. Regrettably, they never made their way home. Could Liang Xu Yang be passenger X? Other than Liang Xu Yang being Chinese and a Malaysia Airlines employee, the rest of his personal information does not fit passenger X profile. For instance, the 5 attributes all more or less point to a solo traveler, but Liang Xu Yang and his wife traveled with a group. Given it was a group activity, they must have booked their flight tickets in Beijing before they began their trip. The prior ticket booking makes Liang Xu Yang very unlikely as passenger X. Let's take a look at Liang Xu Yang then. Liang Xu Yang was born in China. He studied engineering at a Chinese university, where he met Melinda. The two married after graduation. Like many of his peers, lured by high pay, Liang Xu Yang accepted a job offer from Huawei. In order to earn even more money, he volunteered himself to work overseas. He was stationed at Huawei Indonesia where he spent 4 years. His job title was Southern Pacific Wireless Communication Engineer. At the beginning of 2014, Liang Xu Yang was transferred from Indonesia to Malaysia. He was excited about the job transfer. He believed his new job would allow him to move his wife and their infant baby from China to Kuala Lumpur. The couple had lived apart during the past 4 years. Liang Xu Yang looked forward to the days when his family could live together in Kuala Lumpur. Living overseas by himself made Liang Xu Yang lonely. His job was stressful. Huawei asked its employees to work on a 996 schedule, which meant working from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. 6 days a week. To release his stress, Liang Xu Yang frequently used text to chat with Melinda. From time to time, Melinda would share with him photos of their baby girl. When chatting with family members, Liang Xu Yang subconsciously practiced self-censorship. He would not mention anything about his job. Melinda did not mind, nor was she curious. Self-censorship was, and still is, a typical Chinese behavior practiced by billions of Chinese growing up in mainland China. It was Friday, March 7th, 2014, the day before the MH370 incident. Liang Xu Yang had another long working day. In the late evening, he texted Melinda to chat. From news we learned that Liang Xu Yang texted Melinda the following messages. Another long working day. Making a hasty trip to the airport. Made a new friend at the airport. Had a pre-flight dinner with the new friend. Boarded the plane, arrival in the morning. And this was the last text Melinda ever received from her husband. Liang Xu Yang never made his way to Beijing. Public information showed his flight ticket had a seat number of 41D. So, was Liang Xu Yang passenger X? Checking Liang Xu Yang's personal information against the 5 attributes, there is only one clear contradiction. He worked for China's Huawei, not Malaysia Airlines. However, this contradiction can be reconciled. In the earlier videos, we have repeatedly hinted that Malaysia's Najib government was one of the primary suspects behind the MH370 incident. Given the power the Najib government assumed, it was easy for them to dress up Liang Xu Yang and claim him a Malaysia Airlines employee. One may argue that Liang Xu Yang's last text to his wife is evidence that he had no intention of hijacking MH370. This argument is valid, but importantly, we are not claiming that passenger X necessarily knew that he would participate in a hijacking when boarding the aircraft. Our goal here is to find out who passenger X was, who was Liang Xu Yang, the Malaysia Airlines chairman called out in 2015. Was it Liang Xu Yang or Liang Xu Yang? The last few texts Liang Xu Yang sent to his wife were intriguing. Typically, one does not make new friends at airports. Liang Xu Yang not only made a new friend at the Kuala Lumpur International Airport, he also spent time having dinner with this new friend. Bear in mind, Liang Xu Yang was short on time. It was evidenced by his text saying he made a hasty trip to the airport. In other words, this new friend must bear some sort of significance. Who was this new friend? Does this new friend in any way relate to Liang Xu Yang's job? This question in turn triggers another question. Why did Liang Xu Yang make a hasty trip to the airport? Did he go to the airport for the sake of his job, or did he simply wish to catch the flight to go home? If Liang Xu Yang, his trip to the airport was simply to go home, he would have gone through the normal procedures, such as asking his employer for a leave in advance. Once the leave was approved, Liang Xu Yang would very likely have shared the news with his wife immediately. He would also book his flight ticket ahead of time. Even if the trip to go home was a last-minute decision, anxiety would make Liang Xu Yang inform Melinda at the earliest time possible. Liang Xu Yang could have texted Melinda a clear indication of his return when he was making a hasty trip to the airport, or he could do so after he had a pre-flight dinner with the new friend. Liang Xu Yang did not use these opportunities. He chose to inform Melinda of his return after he boarded the plane. This timing suggests there was some uncertainty as to whether he could board MH370 successfully. If Liang Xu Yang boarded the flight from gate C1 like all other passengers, there was no need for him to be concerned. His uncertainty becomes understandable if he was asked to board later through the EE Bay when the aircraft was on the runway. This suggests Liang Xu Yang's airport trip was job-related, not simply to go home. Liang Xu Yang's profession is another reason why he was more likely the mysterious passenger X. After the MH370 incident, many experts in the industry believed that whoever took over the plane, the person was technically sophisticated and possessed greater knowledge of Boeing 777 avionics than most commercial airline pilots. For instance, judging by the loss and the subsequent recovery of the SATCOM, someone had to go to the EE Bay to turn off the primary power to the SATCOM and then turn it back on again. The SATCOM circuit breaker was obscurely placed, and most pilots were not trained to recognize it. Liang Xu Yang was Huawei's wireless communication engineer. He was technically sophisticated. With modest training, it would have been easy for him to find the SATCOM circuit breaker and turn it off. Most likely, he turned the power back on again seconds before 2:25. As a result, the aircraft sent a fresh logon request to Inmarsat's satellite. One wonders if Liang Xu Yang was a pilot. If not, he needed a teammate who was a pilot in order for Liang Xu Yang to perform his job. Realistically, the 30-year-old wireless communication engineer was not likely a pilot. That means there was a rogue pilot on board MH370. This suspected rogue pilot will surface in a later video. Others may wonder why Liang Xu Yang would alter settings in the Yi Bay. Why did he turn off the power to the SATCOM? There was nothing for him to gain. He even lost his life. A short answer is that Liang Xu Yang did whatever his employer Huawei instructed him to do. He may not have fully understood the implications of what he was doing. This sort of blind obedience is a typical Chinese culture behavior. Call it Confucianism if you wish. Huawei, as a Chinese company, expects absolutely unconditional obedience and loyalty from its employees. When required, its employees are to act as wolf warriors at all costs for the benefit of Huawei. These expectations are generally understood and accepted by Huawei's employees as conditions for Huawei's higher pay. To understand Liang Xu Yang's seemingly odd behavior related to the MH370 incident, one needs to understand Huawei and its wolf warrior culture. This is all on Passenger X Unveiled. If you are new to MSI, you are invited to subscribe this channel. If you are already a subscriber, a thumb up is appreciated. Feel free to share this channel with others. The MH370 incident deserves everybody's attention worldwide for the sake of safe public air traveling. Next time, the video is titled Huawei and its Wolf Warriors. See you then.